Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It is Monday, the 4th of July, and tonight we are talking about America's independence from the Earth. NASA is going back to the moon. Its three-part mission could launch as soon as next month. Artemis builds on Apollo from 50 years ago. NASA took us behind the scenes at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We will show you everything from the new rocket to how the crew will feed itself. That includes growing their own fruits and vegetables in dirt from the moon. You'll see the innovative robots that will do research on the lunar surface, and we'll find out how the Artemis team plans to do all of this in a sustainable way. Plus, meet some of today's astronauts, from the crew in orbit right now on the International Space Station to the women of SpaceX in commercial rockets that might someday have a seat for you. All right, pop quiz. Who was the first astronaut on the moon? Neil Armstrong, of course. But who was the last one? Here's what he said on that day 50 years ago.
And a final word from the last man on the moon.
I'd like to just let what I believe history will record, that America's challenge of today has forged man's destiny of tomorrow.
The answer? Eugene Cernan of the Apollo 17 mission in 1972. Since he left, no American astronaut has been back. But NASA is working to get back on the lunar surface within the next few years. It's put a lot of imagination, innovation, and effort into this. A new mission named from Greek mythology for the goddess of the moon, the sister of Apollo. This is Artemis.
It's absolutely fascinating when you think about the technology that the Apollo teams utilized.
It's one small step for man.
Not only on the ground, but on the spacecraft, on the Saturn V launch vehicle, pushing the boundaries of technology.
One giant leap for mankind.
They got on these things and they learned to go to the moon and travel in space when we didn't know if it was possible. The benefit we have, following in their footsteps, is to learn from what they did and build on it with the technology we have today.
So Artemis is all about NASA returning to the moon, but this time in a sustainable way.
The directive I'm signing today will refocus America's space program on human exploration and discovery. It marks an important step in returning American astronauts to the moon.
Somehow Artemis has managed to survive the switch from a Republican president to a Democrat president, which is quite unusual, and it maybe shows the strength of the program. When the Artemis mission was first proposed a few years ago, and they touted a 2024 lunar landing, I think a lot of people were a bit incredulous, didn't think that would happen, but things seem to be kind of surprisingly on track.
Artemis is a very aggressive program, and we're at the final operational point. We're about to move and see the SLS rocket and Orion launch crew for the first time here in the next couple of years.
We were meant to see SLS launch already by now. Initially, the rocket rolled out to the pad a month or two ago, and we were expecting a launch maybe by May or June. Unfortunately, a few issues have delayed that launch, and it's now looking like it's going to be maybe towards the end of the summer. But SLS is a cornerstone of NASA's Artemis program.
So the Space Launch System, the SLS, this is the most powerful rocket that exists on the planet today. When you look back and compare it to the Saturn V rocket, it may be a bit smaller and a bit shorter, but it's more powerful from a liftoff thrust than the Saturn V was. And what it really boils down to is the ability for us to take bigger and heavier payloads to the moon. The SLS is made up of several pieces. On either side of the big orange section of the vehicle are are our solid rocket boosters. Then in the middle orange section, that's your core stage. And beneath that are 4 main engines for the core stage. Above that is our interim cryopropulsion stage. That is our upper stage that will basically take the Orion spacecraft and the service module to the moon. That's what allows us to leave Earth's gravity and go to the moon. Above that, we've got our service module provided by the European Space Agency that basically has an engine on it, breathing air, all of the things that Orion spacecraft needs during its mission. Above that is the Orion spacecraft. That's where the astronauts will ride when we get to Artemis 2. And then above that is the launch abort system. And that's the pointy piece at the very top. And it's used in the emergency condition if the Orion capsule needs to be pulled away from the rest of the rocket during flight.
The rocket's been pretty widely derided. It's very expensive, it's very over budget, it's very delayed. Yes, SpaceX can maybe do it cheaper with their Starship rocket, but that is still an unproven rocket, as is SLS. So having these 2 options on the table does give us a bit of redundancy, does allow us to kind of plan having a lunar program in the near term.
So at the end of the shuttle program, as we ramp down from shuttle, we're looking for what does NASA do in space and how do we get to the destinations we want to go to. And NASA started focusing on the deep space missions. So how do we get to the moon and Mars and beyond? You know, what does a spaceship have to look like to do that? So we came up with a capsule design similar to Apollo.
These are still the best way to get humans back through Earth's atmosphere. I mean, these re-entries are very hot.
When we hit the atmosphere, we're going about 25,000 miles an hour. It's about 5,000 degrees during re-entry, and the crew's got to be about 3 feet above it inside the crew module, so that's really important. All of our landing systems, our parachute systems that slow you down from that 25,000 miles an hour down to landing speeds.
And currently, a small capsule with a few seats is one of the best ways to do that. Now, whether that's the case in the future, I'm not so sure, and SpaceX are touting that their Starship vehicle can kind of replace this capability. They can bring the whole thing back through the atmosphere with humans on board and kind of end the need for capsules. But for the time being, we don't have another way to get humans back through the atmosphere.
Well, Orion specifically is built for a crew of 4. I had the privilege of having some of the Apollo astronauts here with us not too long ago, and they were kidding each other saying, hey, what would we do with all this space that we have, right? It's significantly bigger inside, gives the crew a lot more volume to live and work in. Back in Apollo, your wristwatch today probably has more computing power than we had trying to land on the moon back then. So computer systems have come so far, it's very autonomous compared to Apollo spacecraft. Things like the solar arrays that you see behind me, right? Apollo had fuel cells and they were limited by the fuel that you could bring to generate power. With the solar arrays and the technology we have today, we have unlimited power as long as we have sunlight. With the Artemis 1 mission, it's the first mission of an Orion spacecraft on the rocket all together, and then we're just going to send it uncrewed, make sure everything works before we put our friends in it. And we have some test mannequins that are flying in Artemis 1 with some radiation sensors on it where we'll monitor the data as we fly. The mission will go out about 40,000 miles beyond the moon. We'll spend anywhere between 20 and 40 days out there, depending on exactly what day we launch. The physics kind of dictates how long you can stay. That will give us all the data we need to prove that the rocket and the spacecraft work well to put our friends on for Artemis 2.
Clearly, Artemis is a big, meaningful mission for NASA, and that's embodied in every aspect of the project, including the mission patch. Check it out. NASA says the tip of the A of Artemis points beyond the moon. That signifies that our efforts at the moon are not the conclusion, but a preparation for everything that lies beyond. The moon, there in the upper right, that's the mission's destination, but also a stepping stone for Mars. We'll talk more about that in a minute. That red swoosh is the trajectory, moves from left to right through the crossbar of the A, opposite the path of Apollo. It's red to symbolize our path beyond the moon to Mars. And the blue crescent shows the mission from our perspective, from the Earth. We go back to the Earth. All that we learn and develop will return with this mission. There's much more to come, including what tomorrow's astronauts will eat on the way to the moon and beyond. We'll show you how NASA is learning to grow fruits and vegetables in space. We're glad you're with us on this 4th of July for Now Tonight from NBC News. The Artemis mission is a milestone, but it's not the end of the road. Our ambitions for spaceflight extend way, way beyond the moon. A mission to Mars could take 3 years or more. And even if we could go right now, there's a problem. What you gonna eat? How do you bring enough food? Now, NASA's working on a solution, not packing food, but growing it. Check out how researchers are learning to farm in space. Scientists have spent years researching how to grow plants on the International Space Station. They're figuring that out here at NASA's Plant Processing Lab. Brian Onate is leading that research.
Food degrades after about a year and a half, and then some of these missions, if they end up being 3 years, some of the nutrients and the vitamins that are in the food and the pre-packed food will just start degrading over time. So if we can supplement that food and basically have an ability for them to have more nutrients that are fresh, the ultimate goal is when we get to a lunar surface or potentially the Mars surface one day, having habitats and actually using the resources located there in order for us to grow fresh plants.
The ISS crew is getting us one step closer to that with its vegetable production system. Today it can grow 3 types of lettuce, Chinese cabbage, Mizuna mustard, red Russian kale, and zinnia flowers. The team also set a new record by growing chili peppers.
It was the longest fruiting crop that we grew on ISS. The crew was just excited to harvest it. They couldn't wait to cut up the peppers and put it in their dinner for that night. It told us a lot. It told us that the crew really looks forward to fresh food, and then also just the ability to enhance it, right? There was almost like, I guess, a psychological piece that came with it.
Onate says it had another psychological impact, a morale booster for a crew far from home.
We heard that some of the crew every day before they went to do an activity, sometimes they would just go take the door off and go look at the peppers, or even open the door and just wanted to smell the plant or smell the dirt that was in there. And it's something that's alive and something that it's not metal.
Meanwhile, research partners at the University of Florida are growing plants in soil from the moon. That soil is called Lunar Regolith. Annalisa Paul, UF's Director of Horticultural Sciences, calls it an unprecedented experiment.
We've been practicing doing this for a decade with Lunar Regolith simulants. We've practiced also in extreme environments, in greenhouses up in, for instance, the Canadian Arctic, to also mimic what that might be like to do in a greenhouse on the moon. But some of the challenges to plants of Lunar Regolith is that it's not much in the way of nutritive minerals or anything in it. So we gave them a dilute nutrient solution. You can think of it as just a fertilizer. Once we introduce it then to plants, the regolith itself changes. And the plants that grew in those had to overcome those initial challenges of growing in a material that's outside their evolutionary experience.
Back at the lab, Brian Onate and his team walked us through some projects in development.
So right here we have tomatoes growing in high CO2. The higher CO2 actually makes the plants thrive and grow a lot bigger. As we go into potentially the Mars transit vehicle, we are anticipating elevated CO2, so we're trying to determine what is the right ratio for CO2, lighting, water, so we can get the most plants out of it. So right here we have the random positioning machine, and we have some microgreens that we're starting to grow in there. The speed that it's actually moving right now is simulating microgravity. So what we're trying to do is fight down some of the risks and understand what's going to happen to these microgreens when we grow on an orbit. We have a variety of microgreens that we're growing. Right here, as you can see, we have 2 trays of Radish Microgreens that we have grown. On Earth, it's easier to cut these with scissors, and we can harvest them and put them in bags. The challenge in microgravity is, as you can see, they're small. So our team is actually working on methods on how to harvest on orbit. It's kind of like a cracked pepper. Imagine if you're just putting it over your food, you just kind of turn it, and we're hoping in the future all it'll do is just cut the microgreens off in space. And of course, so they don't float away, we have to have capture bags. This chamber, we actually have some of our strawberries growing right now. Our team has actually been working on starting the strawberries from seed, and that's very important because our missions for explorations are going to take months to years, and we definitely want to have the seeds available for them to start production of strawberries. So one thing that our team actually developed here years ago, something that we called seed film, and what we do is actually get some of the seeds and we kind of put them in this dissolvable material, so whenever the crew is ready to use them, we can actually put them into the plant media, put some water, and get them growing.
Growing healthy crops is one thing, but researchers are also figuring out how to detect problems before plants get visibly sick. Plant physiologist Oscar Monhay has helped develop a machine that collects data with light.
This is a hyperspectral imaging system. It records fluorescence information that would be related to damage. Like if a pump broke and they were getting dry or experiencing drought, you would be able to see that before the plant started growing slower.
Artemis 1 is scheduled to launch in August. If it does, Brian Onate's team will have a few experiments aboard.
We're flying seeds, we're flying algae, yeast, fungi, and basically this is going to be our first time to look at the effects of radiation in that deep space environment and how does it affect biological specimens.
Clearly, moon dirt could prove useful, but dust? That could be a problem. Up next, you'll see how NASA is preparing its new robots to explore the moon, even if debris gets in the way. And later, we'll introduce you to some of the women behind SpaceX, pioneering commercial spaceflight. If humans can live on the moon, we'll have to solve a lot of problems first. NASA is learning to grow crops in space, but building a settlement raises many more challenges. Like, how do you create infrastructure for a lunar outpost? It could be rather complicated to build since there's not as much gravity to keep things on the ground. So how do you solve these many complex questions? Well, Lockheed Martin still calls its wild idea lab the Skunk Works. Check out NASA's lab, Swamp Works.
Where do we come from? Are we alone? These are fundamental questions. If we answer those, we can map our future. We can have a good strategy. We can protect ourselves. We can understand our place in the universe. These are fundamental questions, and we will start to answer those when we go to the moon and Mars. But first, we have to test the technologies. This lab that you're looking at now is called the Swamp Works. It's an innovation environment. If you want to go into space, you have to be innovative. You can't use the same methods as you've used before. And the technology is constantly evolving. It's constantly getting better.
Dust has been identified as one of the top 2 impediments to long-duration human space exploration for the moon. The other one is obviously radiation effects.
The surface appears to be very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder.
It is a significant problem. The dust is very small, very fine particles. It's toxic. It gets into the joints and moving parts of all the mechanisms. For the Apollo mission, many of the mechanisms were rendered unusable after 3 days of exposure. So we've been developing our electrodynamic dust shield technology for 20 years or so. It's a technology demonstration of active dust removal. So you push a button and the dust removes from a surface. And what I'm going to do is, if I have a glass surface that's coated with dust, I'm going to turn on my EDS and I'm going to watch the dust remove from the surface. So they can be made quite large. Roughly the same amount of power as what you just saw there, we can actually remove dust from a floor mat, essentially. And that's our goal, is to try to get as many EDSs on the surface of the moon as possible so that humans don't have to spend time clearing surfaces, they don't have to time brushing off their suits or kicking off their boots or spending a lot of time trying to wipe their visors.
When Buzz Aldrin landed on the moon, he said, "Magnificent desolation." It looks like that, but if you go into the dirt, into the lunar soil, which we call regolith, it's crushed rock. And in the crushed rock, we have minerals, and in the minerals, we have elements, and we have a lot of resources there. If you pick up a bucket of dirt on the moon, 42% of that bucket is oxygen.
We are developing excavation technologies to be able to excavate the regolith, which has the resources in it, so then we can send it to processing plants to extract all those resources. Currently, we have a mission that's right now scheduled for FY26. We're actually going up there to collect 10 metric tons of regolith and deliver it to just a simple area that we're going to pile it up at, just to prove that we are able to actually excavate on the moon. The one behind me is Razer 2. It's the second generation of this concept. This robot here doesn't look like any other type of excavation system that you've probably ever seen. Excavators here on Earth use the weight of their vehicle to react their excavation forces. When you go on the moon, now you're 1/6 the weight that you are here on Earth, so you don't have the reaction force anymore. So we came up with an idea utilizing these bucket drum technologies, and the excavation forces from one counteracts the excavation forces from the other side. So now we're not reliant on the weight of the vehicle to provide that reaction force like you would here on Earth. Some of the other areas that we're working on beyond just excavation is construction. We have current projects right now utilizing 3D printing technology. We can actually print full roads if we wanted to, if we could print repair parts for our robots.
What we're trying to do is prove out technologies that we can use to build large-scale structures on the lunar surface using local resources as much as possible. A lot of work is being done to sinter regolith, which is essentially melting the regolith so that it forms a solid structure. This is basalt fiber. It's like basically fiberglass or carbon fiber, but it's made out of rock. We're learning to 3D print large-scale infrastructure. One of the hazards that we have to face on the lunar surface is radiation. So one of the ideas is that we can create this protective structure by 3D printing a large arch and then covering that with regolith so that all of the radiation exposure would be basically mitigated. In my mind, the very first sustainable presence on the moon is going to be more like an outpost or a camp. And so you'll probably use bulk regolith infrastructure to build things like berms and compacted roads and level surfaces. But then as time goes on, NASA and commercial industry will start building up their technologies. We'll start to build up markets there, and it will start to look a little bit closer like a city or a larger scale community like we have on Earth.
We'd love to run space station as long as we can, and we've got support to continue to operate space station until the 2030s. But however, it's an aging system, and we're starting to see the commercial evolution in low Earth orbit. Gateway takes advantage of what we've learned in space station.
We're going to have what we call a gateway, which is, think of that as a small space station in lunar orbit. With a gateway, it's going to be quite a bit further away. It's about 240,000 miles away as opposed to, 200 or so.
Gateway represents an orbiting platform that goes around the moon. We can now learn to live longer in a different environment, a different radiation environment, a longer trip from home. The emergency situation changes. If we can expand that and bring that out to the moon, now we have the opportunity to access all the different locations of the moon and really start to set the stage for a deep space transportation that'll bring us to Mars.
We have a science region of interest and a resource region of interest. And for the resources, we're trying to extract resources to survive and build a local economy. And for science, we're trying to expand the state of knowledge so we can understand our whole solar system and how it relates back to Earth. What is our place in the solar system? How does our planet evolve? And how can we keep our planet healthy and safe?
We're the research and development leg for the American public. So we are always stretching the boundaries of what is possible. That's the point. Because our investment in what NASA does has tremendous returns back to expanding the minds of our children to understand what's possible, pushing the technology here on Earth to make our lives easier and finding ways to take care of what we have. That's the whole point.
But at its heart, I really think it's about the nature of people to want to explore, want to find out what's out there. And, I think there'll be huge benefits to all of humanity for doing that.
Coming up, we head high above the Earth to the International Space Station and meet 2 astronauts in orbit right now. Plus, when can we expect to see images from the new James Webb Space Telescope? NASA says the highly anticipated first light images are in. Apparently, they moved some scientists to tears. At the end of last year, NASA launched a new telescope like the world had never seen. It's designed to look deeper than ever into the universe. The James Webb Space Telescope is as big as a tennis court, as heavy as a school bus, and it's already sent back some incredible pictures. Last week, astronomers began to finally receive images from Webb. It's taken 6 months for these first light pictures to arrive, and NASA plans to reveal these images on July 12th. Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy says the first images, quote, moved me as a scientist, as an engineer, and as a human being, unquote. Clearly, we are a long way from the old Hubble Space Telescope. The Webb is said to be 100 times more powerful, and it will orbit the sun. But the Hubble did teach us a lot in its 30 years of orbiting the Earth.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery with the Hubble Space Telescope, our window on the universe.
We will be probing the time of the earliest history of the universe.
Almost a century later, the space telescope that bears Hubble's name gives us our most up-to-date estimate of the number of observable galaxies in the universe.
Ultimately, as is the case with all voyages of discovery, its greatest contribution will be the unexpected breakthrough that brings completely new knowledge.
Ahead of the Webb's launch, I spoke with two scientists who had big roles in developing the new telescope. Dr. John Mather is senior project scientist on the project. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2006. And Dr. Begonia Vila is a systems engineer at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. Very cool. Joining us now are two scientists who had big roles in developing the new telescope. Dr. John Mather is senior project scientist on the project. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2006. And Dr. Begonia Vila is a systems engineer at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. She is in French Guiana for the launch. Thank you both for making time for us. Welcome to you both. Glad to have you on the program. Dr. Mather, let me start with you and try to get at what we've learned from the Hubble and how we hope to advance it with the James Webb. As we mentioned, the Hubble was instrumental in our understanding of and discovery of dark matter in 2006. Talk about what dark matter is and how the James Webb might add to that research.
Sure. Dark matter is a substance that astronomers can detect the presence of, but we can never see. As far as we can tell, it's completely transparent, but it has gravity, and it's very important to us because from our story of the expanded universe, we believe it's the reason we are here. In other words, dark matter started moving soon after the beginning of the expansion of the universe, and it formed the objects that were going to lead to galaxies. So we are here in person today because dark matter started the process of forming galaxies a long time ago. So we will be looking at that and looking for the effects of that dark matter.
Dr. Vila, what about the James Webb Telescope itself? The Hubble needed some servicing around 1994, and it made a big impact in terms of the quality of the images that it sent back. What's the plan in terms of, you can see the difference, the before and then after the first repair mission. What's the preparation been like for preparing for potential repairs for the James Webb?
Well, Hubble is orbiting the Earth, so as you said, it was possible to do repairs. James Webb is going to be 1 million miles away, 4 times the distance of the moon, so we cannot repair it. So a lot of the effort on James Webb has been a very thorough test campaign on the ground to make sure it is going to work as it should. And one advantage it has over Hubble is that the big mirror of James Webb, which is made of 18 smaller mirrors that we can fold to fit in the rocket, has actuators on the back. So we will not have the same problem that Hubble had. And if we did, we know how to correct it real time, sending commands from the ground.
Dr. Mather, another area in which the Hubble telescope advanced our understanding was the age of the universe. How does the James Webb factor into that? Is it kind of connected to what you were talking about with dark matter and understanding the forces that began to move after the beginnings of the formation of the universe, or is there more to it than that?
No, there's more to it than that. The Hubble was used to detect the fact that the universe is accelerating, expanding faster and faster every day. And we expect to measure that effect but much better with the Webb telescope, because we can see farther back in time, and we can see the infrared light that helps us see those special marker stars that are called supernovae that we use to measure distances. So we expect to get a better measurement of this, but it's gotten very interesting in the recent years because now we have more than one way to measure the expansion rate, and we're not getting the same answer every time. So something's out there, something very mysterious.
That was Dr. John Mather and Dr. Begonia Vila from the team behind the James Webb Space Telescope. Some powerful women are getting SpaceX flying high, building its rockets and spaceships. You'll meet some of them before we go. You know, there's a lot going on above our heads right now. 254 miles up, history is being made. Astronauts on the International Space Station are working on technology that might get humans to Mars one day, and even improve life here on Earth. Recently, we talked about living and working on the ISS with mission specialists Dr. Jessica Watkins and Dr. Charles Lindgren.
Station, this is Joshua Johnson with NBC News. How do you hear me?
We have you loud and clear. We're ready for the event.
Well, Charles Lindgren, Jessica Watkins, thank you for making time for us. I know you've got a lot to do, doing backflips on the International Space Station and so forth. Could I just start with that? Jessica, this is your first time in space. What was it like for you learning to get around in space, learning to do things like a backflip in microgravity?
Yeah, I'm still working on the backflip part, but yes, it has been so fun. It's been challenging, but also one of the most fun parts about being up here is kind of learning how to think and translate and move in 3 dimensions. So learning to use the whole volume and use your hands to translate around. It's been really fun. At least I've got great teachers here.
Dr. Lindgren, is that one of the things that people, when they get to space, they most have to kind of acclimate to, is figuring out where they are literally in space, or are there other things that the body goes through on its first space flight that might feel a little weird?
Yeah, moving around in this weightless environment is probably one of the biggest one. There are a whole host of things that are going in our bodies that are a little bit different, and weightlessness is actually just one part of it. We're in an environment where the atmosphere components, our carbon dioxide is a little bit higher. There's ambient noise that's a little bit different, but weightlessness is definitely a big part of it, and so our neurovestibular system has to adjust to that. Our cardiovascular system is adjusting to it. Our bones and muscles will start to weaken if we don't do something about it, so we have to exercise every day. There's a whole host of things that we've been studying for a long time and continue to get new data on, and that's a big part of the research that we conduct here on the space station. Is actually, as subjects, scientists are studying blood and bone and all of those things to continue to understand the changes that we undergo being here in this weightless environment.
We got some great questions from some elementary school kids and from some of our viewers about what it's like for you to be up in the International Space Station. That last one came from Liam, who is 10 years old, who asked what else feels different in space. Nick, who is 10 years old, asked, what do you do at the International Space Station? And Jacob, who's 11, asked, what do you do for entertainment while you're up there?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the coolest parts about being up here is that every day is pretty different. We kind of have the same structure during the workday, but what fills up the workday can be very varied, which keeps us on our toes and keeps things exciting. So that's nice. We wake up in the morning. We have a large meeting, kind of a conference, with the 7 of us on board, as well as with the ground teams. So teams in Houston and in Japan and in Munich, and all across the world, in Moscow as well. So it gets all of us kind of on the same page and ready to go for the day. And then we kind of split off to do our different tasks. So we have lots of science that we're excited about doing on board, lots of different experiments that we are conducting. We have the honor and pleasure of conducting. And then we also have maintenance tasks. So fixing things up here on station, making sure that everything is in tip-top shape and ready to do the jobs that all the various equipment and systems are there to do. Then we also get to do fun things like talk to you all. And then in the evenings, what we like to do for fun is kind of dependent on each crew member, but we definitely like to have dinner together, talk about how our days went, just like the family that we are up here. And then we'll call home or watch a movie or things like that, just to keep ourselves entertained until it's time for bed.
Dr. Lindgren, let me get to a question from Victoria and Ciara about space flight. Since you've flown on a mission to space before, you were in a Soyuz spacecraft back in 2015, and now you're on a SpaceX spacecraft. This was the SpaceX Crew 4 mission. Victoria, who's 11, asked, what is your first thought when you get into space? And Ciara, who's 10, asked, are you nervous when you start launching off into space?
Yeah, Victoria and Sierra, those are great questions. I think the first thing that goes through our minds when we arrive on orbit is, wow, that was amazing, because we have just ridden a rocket. Right at the end of that rocket flight, the G-forces, we weigh about 4.5 times our body weight. You really feel that acceleration, and as soon as the engine shuts off, you're immediately weightless, and you get thrown forward into your straps, and you're just, it's absolutely amazing. In terms of nervousness, I think that fear comes from things that are not understood, and so we trained for close to a year on launching in that spacecraft and really understanding all of the things that could go wrong and what we could do about it. And I think that really trains a lot of the fear out from that experience. I think that we all have some level of anxiety as we get onto the rocket. We're a little bit nervous because this is something new, and we know we've got a kind of adventure ahead of us. But I think that we all felt very confident about the rocket. We felt confident about our training, and really we looked forward to that experience of launching and flying to the International Space Station and getting here to do the work that we're doing. And now we have that opportunity to look out the window and see the absolutely beautiful planet that we call home. And it's always amazing to look out the window and look back at the Earth where our friends and family live.
Dr. Watkins, a lot has been made of the fact that you're the first black woman to spend extended time on the ISS. You spoke to my colleague Lester Holt about that. I'm sure that is not at the top of mind for you as you're doing your job on the ISS. Down here, issues like race and class and culture are very much top of mind. You have, I think, maybe the luxury of being a little bit further away. I do wonder, though, who paved the way for you. I had no issue being on television because I saw black men anchoring the news. I thought, oh, I can do that. What did you see when you were coming up that led you to say, I can do that? Or did this career develop despite a lack of role models? What was that path like for you?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up that certainly up here we are pretty much 100% focused on the mission and on the job and getting the job done, and we certainly are here to do that as a crew. But you're right. Certainly, growing up, I had the pleasure, the luxury of having role models kind of pave the way for me. Particularly, I think about Mae Jemison and Sally Ride, astronauts that literally paved the way, literally opened the door for people like me to walk through. And also, I had lots of mentors and teachers and coaches, instructors along the way who, even if they weren't in this exact role, encouraged me along this path and supported me in my endeavors and my dreams. So I'm really grateful for that.
A few more quick questions before I have to let you go. Dr. Lindgren, we got a very good practical question from Nestor.
When you have to reboot a computer at home, do you have to do the same thing on the space station? I've always wondered if you have to restart systems or do a system shutdown or hard reset, Is that safe? Is it possible?
That's actually one of the great things about being up here is that there are a lot of things that are just the same as home. And so if we have a computer that's not working, before we call IT support on the ground, we will generally reboot it first, because that will be the question that we get first is, hey, did you turn it on or turn it off? And it turns out, just like back on Earth, that just powering the computer off and then back on usually fixes the issue. If it doesn't, though, we've got an amazing team of computer specialists in mission control that when we have computer issues or internet connection issues, that we've got folks on the ground that are helping us figure all of those things out. It's amazing to be a part of a team with such a wealth of experience and expertise to be able to rely on those folks when we have issues.
I love the fact that even though you are so far above Earth and we are here on the surface, that a call with IT tech support still is exactly the same. Did you turn it off and did you turn it back on again? That, if nothing else, gives me hope. Dr. John Lindgren, Dr. Jessica Watkins, what an honor. Thank you both so much for making time for us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I get to be on television. They get to do backflips in space. They win. Everything about space flight is changing, from what the rockets look like to what the astronauts look like. NASA says Artemis will land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon. Women are also making their mark at SpaceX. Among their goals, getting humans to Mars by the end of this decade. They shared their stories with CNBC's Shepard Smith.
We are building rockets and spaceships here in Hawthorne, California.
Gwen Shotwell in one of her favorite places on Earth. It sounds to me like you know how to do everything in here.
No, I don't have the skills to make rockets, but I do know largely what goes on here.
She's the president and chief operating officer of SpaceX. She started out years ago as a mechanical engineer, her first love, and it shows. What's happening here?
We call this tank land. This is where we take flat sheets of metal, roll them, weld them together. That's a barrel. You turn barrels on their side, and then you do a circumferential weld. It's like sausage making. Move the tank, add another barrel, weld it, move the tank, add another barrel, and then you have a rocket.
Rockets are the stuff of big dreams here, and big dreams are Gwen's daily bread. When do you think we're going to Mars?
We should put people on the surface of Mars within a decade. I think it would be in this decade. Yes. People on the moon sooner. It's a very exciting time right now. I think the most exciting time in space since the Apollo era.
So inspiring to hear someone who thinks like this all the time. I mean, I think about going to the supermarket. You think about going to Mars. You think there'll come a time when we're all of that mindset?
Oh, absolutely. I think we need to get a large delivery to the surface of Mars, and then people will start thinking harder about it. And then I think within 5 or 6 years, people will see that that is a real path, that will be a real place to go.
2 decades ago, when Gwen became employee number 11,
there's Gwen at her cube.
SpaceX had skeptics galore. Elon Musk's startup lost rockets, almost went bankrupt, but stayed the course. 10 years ago, SpaceX delivered cargo to the International Space Station for the first time. 2 years ago, it delivered astronauts there. Along the way, it shook up the industry. What is the area in which this company has disrupted to the greatest degree?
So the fact that we have been able to do what we're doing, reusability, is absolutely key. That is the most disruptive technology. But the fact that we can do what we're doing for the price point that we have offered, we've changed this industry. I think much to the dismay of kind of the way this industry was operating before, we came in and built far more efficient rockets so that more customers can afford to fly their payloads to space. And that made part of the industry very mad at us.
And you like that?
I love that. You gotta fight a good fight every day.
Gwen works, of course, for the world's richest man and one of its most controversial. He's also demanding. It's up to Gwen to make it all work. There's never a we can't do that.
Oh no, I might think that, but you zip it when he says something that sounds too crazy, because he's been right in the past, and so you just figure out how to go do it.
3, 2, 1, ignition.
Liftoff.
Gwen was in mission control, as she often is, when SpaceX launched Crew 4 late last month.
You know, the scariest days for me at SpaceX now are people fly days, when we fly crew. They're terrifying. You've got souls sitting on the top of that rocket. It is hurtling through the atmosphere, getting to space, and their lives are in my hands, our hands as a company. And that's pretty terrifying.
But there's joy when it goes well. Today, Gwen leads a company of more than 10,000 employees, worth more than $70 billion. She's a legend in the aerospace world. And even though she tries to deflect attention from herself,
the best part of my job is being able to work with these extraordinary people.
It's clear she's inspired a generation of women to reach for the stars too. Like these 5, all leaders in their own right.
She's the coolest boss ever.
Yeah. She's one of the main reasons I came. It's like, nothing else, I get to work with Webb. This is going to be cool.
Senior space operations engineer Anna Menon is going to space herself later this year. Her husband, an astronaut too, will follow her.
When you beat your husband to space, how's that going to go?
It's going to be, you know, honestly, I think actually the job of the parent that remains on Earth with the kids is actually the harder role. And I'm just really incredibly grateful for his support.
Crazy. I mean, you're both going to space. Whoa.
We also think that's crazy.
SpaceX is now testing this giant, the Starship, a spacecraft designed for interstellar travel. Shanna Diaz directs Starship engineering.
I can't believe I get to work on this every day. Like, this is so awesome. I can't get it done fast enough, basically.
Let's go to the moon.
Yeah, how do we get it done fast?
I want to go to the moon.
Jessica Jensen is the most senior mission manager at SpaceX. If you want to make the idea of colonies in space seem real, she says visit Starbase in South Texas.
Once you go to Starbase, you will believe in Moon and Mars bases.
Tell me why.
The scale of the ships, the scale of the booster, these are the spaceships that are going interplanetary. You have no doubt once you see them.
Gwen says interplanetary travel will be humanity's next great adventure. She seems born for it.
You know, if you don't force yourself to do really hard things, then I think achieving them is kind of less. And so the harder the problems, kind of the bigger the reward when you achieve them. And I think it's critically important that we are exploring other planets physically. There's robotic exploration now, which is extraordinary. But I think people need to go to these places. And I think life is far more exciting if you're out flying amongst the stars.
And one day, Gwen Shotwell says she's going to get out there herself.
When Gwen Shotwell is on the moon, what will she do?
Look back at planet Earth, look up at the stars from a completely different way, jump around, have fun, do flips.
Want to stay for a while?
I would love to stay for a while.
That was CNBC's Shepard Smith reporting. Hey, thank you for making time for us tonight. I would love to hear from you about the Artemis mission or the future of space flight. What questions do you have? And if you could, would you go? Reach out to us. We are at NBC Now Tonight on social media. Leave us a brief but brilliant voicemail, 888-575-2NBC. That's 888-575-2622. Or email us nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. Happy Independence Day. We'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.